This time in the Prop Master, well, we start with some 3D printed parts and we end up with Boba Fett's right Vambrace, complete with basic paint and damage. Looks pretty good. And on a technical note, I fixed all of the rainbow pixelated flashes that were happening all through the videos. Basically, I have no idea what happened. They just went away. So as you can probably guess from the intro and the thumbnail of the video, when I asked everyone what they wanted me to do for the next series, the answers were pretty much overwhelmingly that you wanted me to go ahead and paint the purchased 3D printed pieces and then move on to the jetpack. So that's what I'm doing. And we've got a pretty good start going here. However, while I started working on the project, I started getting more and more requests to go ahead and build this from scratch. So I think what we're going to do is I'll go ahead and finish painting this and we'll move on to the jetpack. But once we finish the jetpack, I think I'll come back and revisit making this from scratch. But when it comes to this, we're actually going to do quite a bit. Since you don't actually get to see me start putting this together, I'll explain how I put everything together, got it ready for paint, and then we'll go over painting it, damaging it, and also adding some little extras here. But that's a lot of stuff to do, as always, so let's get to work. So as you know, this was not originally the project itself. I was just trying to get something so I could get a good feel as to what this actually looks like in its size. That being said, I didn't actually film anything with me working on this. So I think the first thing we should do is for me to catch you up on what I've done so far and how to get to, how to get to here. So the first thing you're going to notice when you get your kit, this is the left Vambrace piece, so it's in the same shape that the right was in. And it looks pretty good, but it has this was done not with a resin printer, but with the little ropes of plastic that get melted in place. So it's got a pretty big texture there. And you want to get rid of that. And this is pretty durable stuff. In fact, this is 60 grit sandpaper. I'm really pushing down too. As you can tell from the sound, it's not really smoothing out a whole lot. So there is a difference. And in fact, when I started working on the right Vambrace, I did mostly use 60 grit sandpaper. But if you try to use a belt sander or a random orbital sander, what tends to happen is it starts to melt the plastic, and you don't want that. The secret that I've found, thanks to a few of the other YouTubers out there, is this is called a cabinet scraper. It's really just a piece of hardened steel that has a burr along one edge, or actually all the edges have a burr on them, but it'll be one side or the other will have a burr. You can kind of feel which one that is, and use it kind of like you would a plane or something like that, where you can scrape along and get very fine shavings of wood when you're doing cabinetry. And it works quite well for taking all these little ridges off. You want to hold it ideally like this, but it's hard for me to do this on camera. So you want to hold it like this, and you don't want to go straight and down. You want it to be about a 45-degree angle. And just pull it toward you. And you see you get these nice, it really does a good job of removing material. Now, if you don't have this and you want to go buy some, I've never found anything like this at Home Depot or something like that, but you can usually find it at a woodworking store. But when you buy them, you can buy them just straight like this, or you can buy them in sort of a little set where there's lots of curves in there, and that might not be a bad idea since we're dealing with a lot of curves here. But even the straight one works fine. And the advantage that this has is it doesn't melt the plastic at all. You know, I was trying to use the finger sander and everything, and it has a tendency to melt its way through and change sort of the shape and texture, which is not what you want. You just want to smooth this out a little bit. Today's video is definitely not ASMR. Okay, and you can see that's actually much smoother. And now if you want, you can go in with your sandpaper. Although I probably wouldn't use 60 grit, I'd probably use something a little bit finer, maybe 150, 220 maybe. Let's try some 220. You have to be careful, I just barely nicked myself with that. It doesn't really hurt, and it's just more bleeding than anything else, but. Okay, I'm gonna go put a Band-Aid on this real quick. Okay, that should take care of that. So this feels actually quite smooth now. And once you do everything, you know, you don't have to be too careful about little things in here, or, you know, you can just spend a lot of time in here. But the truth is, a little bit of texture in there is not a bad thing either. So if you wanted to leave that part alone, you could get away with that totally. So once you've got everything smoothed out, we want to go ahead and hit this with some filler primer, or even just filler if you wanted to, but then eventually you're going to have to go over that with primer. So I use the filler primer, and that's going to fill in all this little bitty scratches that are left over, and then sand that a couple times. Although, you know what? Let me back up a little bit. I'm running away here. Once you get everything smoothed with the cabinet scraper and the sandpaper, then you want to go ahead and start assembling some things together before you start painting. It can really go either way, but sometimes painted pieces don't glue together well. I like to keep it where it's still bare plastic when I'm gluing. And what you'll notice is that this will not come like this. It's going to come in parts. This particular one came with these two pieces as separate. This piece here was separate, and this piece right here was a separate piece. And it's pretty, you know, just looking at this, you can pretty much see how it goes together. On this piece, you want to make sure that the end that has the little tapering flanges, these pieces here, the tapering end, those go out, and the flat ends go into this piece right here. And then this piece just gets, and I'm just using CA glue, super glue, crazy glue, whatever you want to call it. So I glued these into holes that were back here, glued this piece onto a flat surface that's basically, you want to run right across the edge of this top piece. Also, this top piece and this bottom piece were two different pieces. So this goes onto the top piece on a flat edge. It's the outside you know, if you've got this on, it's the outside here. And then this piece just literally glues right onto here. Now, if it's a little too rounded, sometimes my understanding is that sometimes this piece does not fit into this space very well. And you might have to do some sanding on that, or filing, or even probably your belt sander is fine, just to change the shape of this piece so that it fits nicely into this corner right here. And then I just glued that in with super glue. I haven't tried to fill anything. There's gaps all over the place. I'll do that later. Let's talk about these two pieces here. Now you could just get some, you know, just like we did before. I hot glued the hinges just like on the left Vambrace on this side, but I didn't want to do it on this side because I didn't want there to be, this piece hides this hinge pretty easily, but there's nothing out here to hide this end. So I didn't want to do it the same way that I did on the left hand Vambrace, although you could if you wanted to. I just took some thin Velcro. It's like regular Velcro, but it's extremely thin. I'll put a link in this for where I got this. It's an Etsy page where I bought this, and I'll put a link where you can get this thin Velcro. It's kind of amazing stuff, actually. And I just glued that on a strip here and a strip on the inside. And this is flexible enough that you can just kind of squeeze in, and then when you push it together, it's not going anywhere. It's very well secured. So there is a gap here, but you don't really see that because this is covering everything up. There's a little bit there, but I think that looks okay to me. If you wanted to, you could Velcro both of these, both this end, you know, both this side and this side. I think it might be a little bit awkward putting it on, but if you've got someone to help you, that would probably be the cleanest way to do it. Okay, so now we can finally get to the point where I sprayed this with the filler primer, and then with a very fine sandpaper, 400 or finer, lightly go over this. We can wet sand it just like we did on the other one to get everything really smooth. Put on another coat of filler primer, do it again. I did 3 coats like that. I'm to this point here where everything is nice and smooth. You can probably, or you can maybe see, I did in fact leave this inside part with the texture. This is smooth. That is not. So these inside pieces do have that texture still, and I think that's actually going to look good. So you got some areas are going to be more difficult to sand flat. These little tight areas here, and all I can say is a little needle file, you know, one of these little flat files, and a lot of work, you know, a lot of time. Just get in there and try to file as best you can. You can also try to fill it. If you just can't get in there and file those ridges off, you can fill those ridges with more of this filler primer, or you can fill it with the rubber, the bumper repair kit like I did on the Mandalorian helmet. Or my understanding is a really good product, which I have not tried yet, but I think I'm going to try it as soon as I can, is concrete repair putty that you would fill a big crack in your driveway. My understanding is that is real easy to get in there, and then it's sandable. So you can fill that in as smooth as you can and then sand it back. Like I said, I have not tried it, but my understanding is that that works pretty well. So now you should be caught up with where I am at this point. It's all, you've everything that, you know, needs to be done to this, you've done before on the left Vambrace, except for the Velcro, and I'll put a link down in the description where you can find that. And now we can go ahead and move forward with getting this ready for paint. What we're going to do now is I've got my Alex Fast Dry DAP, and I'm just going to fill in some of these gaps from where this piece is not 100% flush with the other piece. Same here, we've got gaps here and there. We're just going to kind of touch all that up. By the way, when you're putting all this stuff together, don't put the darts on yet. Leave those separate. We'll put those on, we'll paint those separately and put those on last. So let's get to work on this. This is going to be difficult to get to, but we can still make it work, I'm pretty sure. This might be a time when we want to use a little makeup sponge. Not sure if this is what we'll actually use or not, but this is just some, you know, regular old makeup sponges that you find at the beauty supply store, or for that matter, most department stores are going to have, you know, little sponges like this. And I want to use as little as possible, and I just want to try to get it down in there. It doesn't have to be perfectly in position because I'm going to go back in and move it where I want it. Less is more also. Don't go on real thick with this. Now I'm going to take my finger, maybe my pinky, dip it in some water. Water's just going to be a lubricant in this case. I'm going to try to get in there and move this stuff around a bit. It's also good to have some paper towels or a rag. We'll do that again in a second. We'll try the sponge. See if I can dip that in the water. And I'm just trying to push all this up against the gap that I'm trying to fill. You get a little, someplace you don't want it, you can just wipe it off. Don't want it on the hinge, because that's going to gum up the hinge. In fact, something like this, where it's up against that hinge, might be good to do that before you actually put this hinge on. But we're still good. Still some gaps here. I think we're going to need to go in with a little bit more filler. Not much. Some more water, so I'm moving it around instead of picking it up with my finger. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Hopefully you can see some of that. This is mostly going to be black anyway, but I'm just trying to fill in some of the gaps. You can see there's a gap right here at the end. That's going to be pretty easy to deal with. Just going to try to push it into the gap and then smooth it out. So you just have to get it pretty close to where you want it, and then I can go in and move it around with my finger when I'm done. Then once you've filled everything in, you just want to try to smooth out all these edges. Don't get too much water, but enough that you're not just scooping up the filler you want to, or putty or caulking, whatever you want to call this. If you have a lot extra, you can use your rag. And this isn't like a seam on a helmet, so you don't have to blend everything perfectly. I just want it to be fairly uniform. So it looks pretty good. I'm going to take my sponge and see if I can get in that corner. Looks pretty good. Oh, you might be able to see right here. I didn't like the fact that there was just a hole in the end of this piece. So I took a tiny little washer and just super glued it over the hole, just so that it had a little bit of a relief there, just a little something other than just a hole drilled in the end of this. I think you can see that. Let's go ahead and do the same thing right there. Not too worried about in there because it's not really going to be visible. Top looks pretty good, but I could also put some in there. Now I'll just see if I can get this as smooth as possible. Use my sponge to clean some of that up. Q-tip might also be helpful for that. Let me get a clean paper towel. Take care of some of this runs we've got. Believe it or not, this caulking, when it's just like a run that runs down, sometimes that becomes visible after you paint, so it's good to kind of clean up your mess afterwards. So like I said before, this is not a seam on a helmet where we're trying to blend it out completely. As long as there's not a gap there, we're in pretty good shape. Sorry. Okay. Now that I've got all that, I'm just going to let this sit. It's supposed to be paintable within 20 minutes, so I'll probably give it 45 just to make sure. And when we're back, we can go ahead and put another coat of the filler primer on there. We're back and the caulk is all nice and cured. We're ready to paint. Just to reiterate, this doesn't have to be perfectly smooth or anything. I mean, you don't want there to be any big ridges or anything like that, but mostly we just don't want there to be any gaps. By the time we paint this and weather it and all that kind of stuff, you know, the fact that there's a little dimple in your sealant here is not going to be noticeable in the slightest. In fact, you notice here there's a little bit of maybe like a little bubble there that popped or something, but it's still going to be fine. Not worried at all about that. So I've just got my 2-in-1 filler primer. I'm out of the red, so this is just my normal gray stuff. But that'll help us to know that we've covered everything good. And just going to put on a light coat, wait 10 minutes to put on a second light coat, wait 10 minutes, and then put on sort of a medium wet looking coat, and that'll be it. So let's get started.
Make sure you go after it in all different directions so that you get into all these little nooks and crannies.
It's a little thicker coat than I was planning on, but it's a little chilly out here, so I had to heat up I had to warm up the paint in some warm water, and I think that caused it to be a little bit higher velocity than normal. But we'll be back in 10 minutes to put another coat. Okay, it's been a little over 10 minutes, so we're going to put another coat on. Once again, a light coat.
Hopefully I didn't spray the camera. Okay, clear this out and we'll do one last coat in 10 minutes.
Okay, we have one last coat to put on here. This one's going to be a little bit heavier, although it's going to be hard to do since the first two coats came on so strong. So normally you'll do 2 light coats and then 1 medium wet coat. So we'll do this and then let it dry. Okay, so the main thing is you just want to avoid any runs or drips. So we'll let this go ahead and dry all the way, which is at least 30 minutes. And then we can go on to the next step. Everything is completely dry now, and we can go on and take a look at this and see if there's any rough areas that need to be sanded. And actually, this is pretty darn smooth. We could definitely go ahead and start painting silver on this if I wanted to, but there are a couple of spots that could stand to be, like you probably can't see it here, but there's a little bit of a rough area right here. And it's still smooth, and that would actually, I think, be fine with the fact this is Boba Fett, and we could do a little damage there. But I'm going to go ahead and try to smooth this out to be as almost polished as I can get it. So I'm going to do a little bit of wet sanding. You don't have to do wet sanding if you don't want to. You can just very lightly go over any rough areas with some fine sandpaper. And by fine, I mean 400 grit or finer. This is 800 grit, and it's wet dry. If you want to wet sand it, you have to have wet dry sandpaper, because otherwise it just kind of falls apart on you. And I just take my sandpaper. The thing I really like about wet dry sandpaper, or wet sanding in general, is that after you do this for a while, you can put it back in here, and it actually cleans the sandpaper off instead of just being clogged with powdered paint. I'm putting very, very little pressure on here, because I'm really more just trying to polish this than I am trying to remove any material. See, and I can just kind of clean my sandpaper off that way. Really concentrating on the large not really flat areas, but the large smooth areas that don't have any detail. Like I'm not going to get in here and try to smooth all this stuff out, or all of this, but large flat areas like this I'll definitely hit a little bit. Now don't go too heavy on the areas you just covered with caulking to smooth everything else out, because you don't have a lot of paint there. Here's that sort of rough area. Okay, now I'm just going to not really rinse it off, but actually I could just go in under the sink, under the faucet in the sink, and just kind of rinse everything off. That might be the best thing to do, but I'm just gonna hit this with some water. And then wipe it off well with a paper towel. But yeah, just taking this and putting it under the sink for a second would probably be a really efficient way to do this. And then dry it off with a paper towel. And then I'm going to let this completely dry for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we can do some painting. Okay, so now we're ready to put on our silver. I'm going to use this Krylon Premium Metallic Original Chrome. This is a good choice. If you can't find this, you could also use this Rust-Oleum Mirror Effect. It's also a good choice. Those are the two that I really like. It doesn't have to be the strongest chrome effect in this particular case, because we want it to look like beat up metal underneath paint, so it doesn't have to be the shiniest. So I'm going to put a very light coat on it, and I'm going to wait 1 or 2 minutes, and then put another light coat on, wait 1 or 2 minutes, and see if I can't build up a little bit of a good coat doing that. Hopefully this won't take as long to dry as the paint in the past has taken. Now I'm only going to paint the top half of this with the spray paint, and just to see what it looks like, I'm going to try to brush on this mirror paint to see how that works. I'll do just the bottom part with that. Okay, I'm going to wait about a minute and put on some more. Okay, I'll let this dry for another minute, and then we'll put on one last coat. Like, this is supposed to be dry to the touch in like 30 minutes. It never is, but I'm going to go ahead and take this in the house and let it dry in the heat for a little bit, and then I'll hand brush the backside. Okay, so it's the next day, and this is really quite dry. My past experience with this paint has been that it's taken up to a week for it to really completely set, but this feels really good. I'm not getting any fingerprints in here. I mean, it really feels dry completely. So I think in the past, the problem that I'm having is some kind of a reaction between the gloss black that I was putting on first and this silver that was keeping it from drying, because this has just been, it's been a few hours and it feels really good. So I guess I just need to pick a different gloss black in the future. So like I said before, I'm going to take this now and flip it, and I'm going to hand brush some of this mirror paint. Another choice would be that Moloto chrome color that I've used in the past. It's also extremely shiny. I don't really need that much shine, but I just want to see how this turns out. So I'm going to try just brushing on this mirror paint. I don't really want to shake this up, so let me see if I can get something to stir that with. Okay, so I've just got a little scrap of a tongue depressor here. Okay. And I've just got a fairly cheap little brush here. Let's actually pull out some of these loose bristles. I mean, it's not acid brush cheap, but it's, it's a cheap little brush. And my understanding is that a little bit of this goes a long way, so let's just see what happens. Let's see how much we can spread this. Probably want to try to keep the brush strokes going this direction, which will sell that metallic feel a little better. Not sure about on camera, but it looks pretty impressive with my eyes. I'm actually fairly impressed here. My understanding is you can do multiple coats and that each coat is supposed to make it a little bit better, but it looks quite impressive just right, one coat straight out of the little bottle. It really has that sort of machined metal appearance. You can see where there was a hair stuck to the primer area, and I peeled it up, but it's still showing up through the silver. but that's fine because I'm painting over all of this. And this will just show through the areas that I want to be dinged up. But I'm definitely going to remember this in the future. I think I may go back and visit my Jango Fett helmet with this. And before you ask, I'm definitely not being sponsored for this. I had to buy this with my own money. I'd be happy for them to send me some money, but that is not the case. Try to avoid the hinge down here. I don't want to glue the hinge closed with any glue, well, with any paint. Even what this area right here is, I don't know if you can see that. Let me look in the camera. This kind of dinged up area here was when I tried to use the belt sander originally to take out some of the ridges that were in the 3D print, and it just kind of melted. But with this metal, with the mirror surface on there, it really kind of looks like some dinged up metal. If you've got an airbrush, you can definitely spray this stuff as well, but I'm kind of liking the effect that the brush is giving me. Of course, we'll just have to see how long this takes to really dry before I get too excited about it. I think I'll go back this way. That matches up with any of the little bit of texture that might be left over from the 3D print. And I'm not terribly worried about it because, once again, I'm going to paint over all of this. And the only part that will show through are the dings. I don't think I'm going to need to put another coat on this, but we'll see after it dries. And I'm not sure how long this is supposed to dry for, but I guess we'll kind of see. So once this is dry, we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and you can kind of see the difference between the spray paint here and the brushed on mirror paint down here at the bottom. I would say the mirror paint is even more metallic than the mirror spray paint, but we really don't need to be that chrome-like for this application. However, it is nice. For the brushed on chrome, it dries fairly quickly to the touch, in which case you can put on another coat if you want to, but before you really do anything else to it, you need to wait 24 hours. It needs to wait 24 hours in a cool place. Cool but not cold. So this is not something where you want to hit it with a hair dryer or something like that. It needs to be in a place cool but not cold for 24 hours, and then you can handle it quite easily. That said, we can go ahead. I've waited 24 hours, so we can go ahead and start masking off. And I'm going to use this masking fluid. This is the one, unlike last time where I kept grabbing the wrong one. This is the one with the fine tip. But enough talking, let's actually get to masking some stuff off here. I've used my reference photos, and I've actually gone over here with a pencil and kind of drawn in what I want to do. I don't know if you can see that at all. So I've got my areas and I want to mask off drawn on with pencil. And I have my forehead light So hopefully this doesn't make the glare too bad. Turn that on, just so I can see things a little better. Hopefully that doesn't blow you out too much. And we can go ahead and just start. Just like before, we don't want to go on, you know, like this. We want to try to keep it more horizontal, just so we don't get too much of the masking fluid. And let's start, I guess, with the top area here. In the very front, not quite in the middle, but just to the right side of middle, we just have a little ding spot, kind of oval. Can you see that? And then on this next level up, this front edge, starting pretty small on the left, but then working its way to get a little bigger as it goes across. And then when you're about a little over 3/4 of the way there, it kind of goes all the way up the side to where this little notch is. And we want to go ahead and get a little bit of the front edge as well. Oh, I got a bit of a run there. Let me see if I can clean that up real quick. You have to really clean that off because even a thin coat of this can stop the paint from sticking. Okay. Now this is a little bit different. It's kind of a triangular shape, small on this end, but it also has some little indentions in the triangular shape. I think you can see this. By the way, the packaging on this masking fluid says that if you have latex allergies, this will not affect you. So I'm guessing it's not actually liquid latex, but it just has a very similar effect. You can kind of see that shape. So it's kind of triangular, but it's got a couple of notches in it. Okay, and then we've just got a bit of a ding here. You don't have to be exact on any of these. I mean, looking at my reference materials of actual screen used Vambraces, they're all completely different. So I picked one of them to replicate, but there's a whole bunch of them that are different. They didn't really seem to try to make them the same. And here we just have the front edge. It's a little bit dinged, but as you get over to the left side, it gets a little bit thicker. Then it has a little finger that sticks up. Little Loch Ness monster that sticks his head up there. And then above that we have another triangular shaped piece, almost like a squashed Starfleet logo from Star Trek. And then it's got a little oval piece on top of that. Then we come all the way back to this little section here. And we have a little peanut shaped piece. It's not very big. And then we have on the left side of this piece, it starts out pretty small, But after about 3/4 of an inch, it kind of swings up a little over halfway, and then in kind of a jagged way, it works its way back down to just on the side. And then fill in all of that. You don't want to go all the way to the end here. And I don't have anything drawn here, but I mean, obviously if you've got that, you're going to have something that kind of mirrors it on the side. Let's see if I can, this is where I can see it. So we start out with sort of the whole front edge. Can you see this? And then on the inside it's thin and it gets thicker toward the outside until it just kind of runs down the left side, getting smaller as it goes down, but with a couple of little bumps up until just past the opening on the side. Okay, and then at the end of this, it kind of picks up again on the front. And then there's a little bit of a gap where it goes back up and then slowly works its way thinner and thinner along the edge. We can do a lot of this with a Moloto chrome pen after we painted it, but it still has a more realistic look if we can peel the paint off of it. You want to get all the way to the edge. In fact, you also want to get some on the side as well. Okay, now how to describe this one. You'll be able to see it obviously, but kind of starts with a triangular shape like this, and then there's a gap and a little bit more of a spike here, like maybe there's some mountain ranges here. They kind of go up and down, then they just kind of end, and we kind of mirror that same shape on the underside. And then there's a gap, and then we have just a couple of little shapes that kind of go off after that. So something like that. There we go, you can see it there. And I think that's all that I have drawn on there for the top surface. And I'm going to wait about 5 minutes or so, just so that that doesn't run. I don't want to make sure it doesn't run anywhere. It's been 10 minutes. In fact, a lot of this is already dried completely, so I don't have to worry about it having runs that run down the thing. Let's go ahead and start with, well, let's do the smaller one so it'll have less to peel off later. So let's just do this side right here, which doesn't have very much. So let's start at this corner right here. We just have a little bit of a, almost like a drop shape. It's bigger in the front and then works its way smaller in the back and kind of right up against this corner edge. I'm going to get this in a spot where you can actually see what I'm doing. Let's see if turning this off helps at all. I'm sure it does, but now actually it doesn't. So what we do here is we've got, it starts in this corner and moves down to about here. So about halfway down this whole side. And it's just gonna like go back and forth with like a longer area here, a shorter area, a longer area, a shorter area, and slowly work its way into a smaller, about halfway down here, into a smaller area, but kind of a zigzag as it goes along. The masking fluid doesn't really want to stick to this paint too well, but just keep working on it and it will eventually fill in the spot you want it. You don't want it to go very thick though, because it will just run down the side. Okay, so we get to about there. That's helpful there. And it kind of stops. And then you want to kind of continue with that shape further down, but there's some gaps in between here. I'm trying to find a spot where I can see, but then you can still see at the same time. And this last one kind of comes down like that. And then just below that, there's a couple of little, not really rectangles, but little blobby shapes, I guess. And then right along this edge right here, when you get to the very bottom of that, it swings back about an inch forward. And then we have kind of a triangular shape that goes back up to about halfway down here. And then from there, it's just going to work its way back about a quarter of an inch from this edge here. And do kind of that shape. And then just fill that in. As long as you get some kind of a blob in sort of the right area, it's going to be fine. And then you have three little rectangular, triangular, trapezoidal, I guess maybe, shapes that are bigger toward the front and smaller toward the back. There you go. And they're just sort of straight back from this one here. And then just sort of right between those and a little bit down below it, you're going to have a little sort of a scratch. I think that's it, to be honest. So just like before, we're going to let this dry for 5 or 10 minutes, just so I don't have to worry about it running around too much when I move the whole piece around. And we'll work on the other side. Okay, I'm back and this is all dried. You know, honestly, you could probably do almost all of this in one time and then let it dry and then just do the back side. But, you know, it's hard enough to do all this stuff on camera, so I don't want to take any chances. So now I'm going to do sort of this side here. And turn my light on. Okay, the biggest areas are on the bottom part. So let's start here in the front, in this area here. It kind of starts out in the corner. gets a little bit wider as it goes down to about a little past halfway between here and the little squares down here. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I guess it's on the inside here. So it's actually this whole section here that you want to fill up. Okay, and then this whole section here, looks more scratched than broken off on the sample piece, but I'm going to go ahead and start it this way, and then if I have to, I can go in and kind of feather some silver on top of the paint at the very end. You can see this. It's kind of a very jaggedy. I think I've got to run. Clean that off quickly. I think my applicator's a little bit clogged as well. Get that back to the right shape. Yeah, I'm having to squeeze this really hard. So if you can kind of see that shape right there. And it kind of goes to here right in the center between the bottom of this and the top. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill all of this in. Okay, I'm going to see if I can clear out the tip of this real quick and then try some more. Okay, so I'm back with a brush. As you can see, you can definitely do that as well. So that's sort of that's a little easier to see, maybe not. So basically it's like a little peak here, the valley, and then a taller peak here that can just kind of sawtooth its way down the edge. This stuff turns clear as it dries, so I think that that's actually got a good coating on it. It just looks like there's big gaps there. Okay, the other one is a big sort of amoebic shape over here. Yeah, it looks like both of these paints are not real conducive to this material. Of course, if you're having too much trouble with this, you can always use toothpaste or mustard. That's what I used on my helmet when I did this. Yeah, if I had to say, I'd say the problem with the liquid mirror is that it is more repellent, even though it's had plenty of time to dry. This water-based masking fluid doesn't want to stick to it. It's not real thrilled to stick to the spray paint either, but it does better than it does on this. little persistence and it starts to work out. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to this section here. It just has kind of a little crescent moon shape. And then just kind of gets smaller and smaller little bumps as it runs down the edge. There we go. And then basically we've already done this top part here. I think I've already gotten the side part of that as well, but just in case. Now we're just going to follow this down the front edge and then around to the corner. And we're just going to kind of go up and down so it's not too smooth. And then end right there where this cutout is. And I'm going to kind of hit the corner here so it's not just on the one side of the corner of the edge. And on the front of this, kind of starts on the same level as where this angle comes in and blends into the curve. Come all the way to the front, and you just kind of work your way a little bit bigger so you get to a little past halfway there. And then you want to put a little, almost like a little finger, a bent finger kind of a shape. I don't know how to describe that. There you go. We'll find it. There we go. That's how you can kind of see it there. Then there's just kind of a little shape here. I don't know how to describe that. Just a little glob. And then a similar glob but going long ways instead of across. Now I'm going to do one that just kind of looks like a little ostrich neck and head on here. That's going to be hard to show. So the problem with, this helps at all, the problem with reflective surfaces, so you can kind of see that. Turn this back on so I can see. And just kind of do a little triangular shape, bigger at the front, that gets smaller as it goes backward along this edge. And then you're going to have a little finger of it that kind of comes off into this area about 1/4 of an inch long. Then just kind of a blob here that almost touches that area there. The blob kind of comes this way and then it goes the other way. Now we're going to have just a little crescent shape a little bit. Kind of continues this, kind of goes there. We kind of have a little line here and then this kind of shape here. And then that arc there. And then we're just going to have a couple of dots. And then finish kind of like that. So kind of as we go across here, we kind of have a little rip, and then a little cloud shape here, kind of, I don't know how to describe it. But as we go all the way to the edge, we're then going to come down and then come back. And there's another little part that sticks up here. Kind of given up on trying to describe these shapes. This one's kind of just a square or a rectangle with a little thing sticking up or down, depending on how you look at it. And then there's a little comma shape that comes off from that. Doesn't look like a comma, but I think when it... Okay. And I think that's it. No, we got this bottom edge here. Just has a little bit of a zigzaggy, sawtooth kind of little shape that goes along the edge. That's really hard to show. There you go. And I think that's it. Oh, I've got one little blob that's on the, starting from the front, you have this first raised area and then the second raised area. And at the part that's toward the top, I'm just going to put a little glob. And I'm sure when I'm doing the finishing stuff, I'll kind of show some scratches all the way along here because it seems like there should be. Maybe I'll put a little bit on here now just to see what it does. Really don't want any on the inside there because that would be harder for it to get scratched. Okay. Now I'm probably going to have to hold this for about 5 minutes for this to dry enough that I can set it down. But once this dries, we can go ahead and paint our burgundy on. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes. I'll wait for this to completely dry, so maybe more like 20 or 30 minutes.
Here we are. The masking fluid is good and dry. Everything's pretty clear, so we're good to go ahead and put on our burgundy coat. I'm using this, which is the Rust-Oleum's Satin Claret Wine. You want to use a satin burgundy color. This is what I'm using, but you use whatever color you used as the burgundy part of your Boba Fett helmet. You want to do 2 or 3 light coats about 1 to 2 minutes apart. So let's go ahead and start spraying. Probably shouldn't spray this part with the burgundy, so I'm going to go ahead and not go over that very much. I'm doing a really bad job of avoiding that, but I can go back with that later with black. Try to go from different angles so you get this all these little areas. Okay, I'm going to wait about 2 minutes and then put on another coat. It's been 2 minutes. Let's go ahead and put on another light coat. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And I think before we start peeling the masking fluid off, let's go ahead and wait a full 24 hours on this. It's supposed to be dry with a touch in 20 minutes, close enough to handle in an hour, but not fully dry until 24 hours. So let's go ahead and wait the full 24 hours.
It's been a little over 24 hours, so the paint is a little bit, I don't want to say sticky, but it's mostly dry. I think it's going to be fine. It's a little soft, I feel. So I want to be a little bit careful with it. But it's time to peel off all the paint that's over the masking fluid. I've got a little citrus peeler here just in case, anything to, if I can't get something to peel up. Mostly I'm just going to use my fingernails. If you're using toothpaste on this, you're going to want to have a damp cloth. It's going to help a lot. I found when I was working on the helmet with the toothpaste, you just every so often you need to go in there and clean off all that toothpaste that's kind of everywhere. And at this point, it's just a matter of scratching it off. I don't want to get too much away from the areas because, like I said, the paint is soft. But once you get it started, you can just kind of rub your thumb on it. It'll kind of push those areas off. In the past, I've had problems where the silver gets kind of dragged across the paint, and that's not good, but hopefully by not putting the black layer down before the silver's cured more than usual. I can definitely see some areas where the silver has come off, or come onto the paint, so that's something we have to be worried about. Some of the silver seems to have come off here. I'm not sure why that is. Let's see if I can. I'm not sure why that is, but I can always go over this silver with some either the Moloto silver pin, or if that's too chrome, I might just go over some of this with a silver Sharpie, or I might just leave it alone because it kind of looks good. So we'll see. A couple of bumps here that look like masking fluid, but I'm not sure all of them are. I think some of them might be some drips in some of the paint layers. So if it doesn't come off easily, then leave it alone. It's not a bad idea to take a picture after you put on the masking fluid, to take a picture so you can see where it all is. As things usually are, I end up finding extra areas, a day later. scratch through the silver, so you gotta be careful with tools. So that's definitely something I'm going to want to repair. Now the chrome paint doesn't seem to be holding up to the process as well as the spray paint did. It's smearing much more. Of course, it was on for a shorter period of time, but not much. So it might take a little bit longer to get completely cured. So it's looking like the chrome, while looking a little more, or I'll say mirror chrome, the mirror paint, which despite the fact it looked more metallic, it doesn't hold up to the to this process as well. So it may be more or less suited for, you know, being a metallic surface underneath paint. Because it also, the latex didn't want to stick to it as well. And it doesn't seem to want to release from it either. So it's not a bad effect, it's just going to take a little repair work, I think. Now, this isn't all of the silver damage that we're going to have. I'm going to go back later and paint over some areas, but these will be the big dinged areas. I'll go back lightly with some silver later and hit almost all of these edges just to bring out some of the relief in the, you know, kind of show off all the facets. I never did go in and do this damaged area here. So I'll work on that with a brush, just dry brushing some silver. And like I said before, I'm sure there'll be, you know, in a day or two, I'll probably find one or two little spots somewhere that I missed. But I think this is it. But this is the sort of the completed sort of damage and paint, but we're actually not done yet because there's actually a couple of toggle switches that go in on this side, and or is it this side? And we'll have to deal with that. Plus there's a couple of buttons that need to have a different color. Okay, now that we have the basic paint and basic damage done, you might think that we're done with this part, but we actually have a couple of steps we still have to do. Now you don't have to do this part because I've seen versions of this that don't have it, but if you look on the screenshots, there's actually a couple of toggle switches that come out right here. On the side that has this part here, which I think is the rope that shoots out. And I've got these little toggle switches, but this is such a small area, I don't think I can put these in without just destroying this top part. So I think the best thing to do is just to make it where they don't work, they just stick out. In fact, if you look at some that I've seen, they're just more like volume knobs that come out, so they don't actually switch back and forth. But when you look actually at the movie screenshots, I'm pretty sure those are toggle switches. So that's what I'm going to put in. I'm just not going to make it where they work because I can't fit this device into this little space. So I think the best thing to do, if you don't want to buy a toggle switch just to break it, you could probably just take a small dowel or a small metal bar that you can get at your Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever hardware store you can get to. I'm doing this because I have them and because the smallest I could find in aluminum was a 1/4 of an inch, which means you've got to go with stainless steel, which is pretty pricey anyway. Then mostly you'll find like nickel plated, which you can do that if you don't try to shape it. If you just make it a rod that comes out, which would actually be fine. You can just find a fairly small, like somewhere around 1/8 of an inch plated steel rod work fine. Just cut a piece that's maybe 1/2 of an inch long to drill and to put in here. We'll get around to that in a second. I'm kind of going off in tangents here, but this is what I'm going to use. I'll put a link on where I got these. I've got a whole bag of them. So I've got some little needle nose pliers. Don't give up, just keep, there you go. I finally got underneath there and I can pry that up. And then I just pop this top piece off. That gives me the bottom part of the switch, which I don't need. I can just push this top piece out and I get this little piece here. And this is what I'm going to use. I'm just going to drill a hole that's roughly the size of this piece right here, this sort of wide area. And we'll go ahead and drill those into here. Let me find out what the size that is real quick. Okay, this section here is 9/64 of an inch, which is a little over, actually it's a little less than 4 millimeters. So you just use a 4 millimeter bit. And so you just want to come out here. I kind of divided this section along here into thirds, and I'm going to drill a hole in the middle, about 1/3 out from here, and another one 2/3 out from there. Doesn't have to be exact. So I've got my 9/64 drill bit, which is, like I said, you could use a 4 millimeter. And I've already marked these, but like I said, I just eyeballed it. And what we do after this is going to depend a lot on what we find when we drill into here. I've got a little center punch here so I don't scratch too much up. Well, that was unfortunate. That was set light, but it still punched straight through here. Smashed a big hole in here, but I can fix that. But it's going to be a bit of a pain. I'm going to go ahead and do another punch. Hopefully not So let me take a look at my damage here, and then we'll get back into drilling. Okay, so this is pretty extensive, but I think what I'm going to do is drill this hole here, and then I can, I think what I'll probably do is fill this whole cavity with some of that Alex Quick Dry caulking, and put my 2 little pieces into these holes, and when that sets, I think we'll be okay. I mean, obviously a better choice would probably be epoxy, and I could use epoxy, but I think either one will work. You know what, I think maybe I will use epoxy. The problem with epoxy is the fumes for that are kind of toxic, so I'll have to wear the respirator, but other than that, yeah, let's go ahead and let's use the epoxy. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is let's go ahead and drill this out. Okay. And that's a good size hole for this. And now I'm going to mix up some epoxy. I'm just going to go with this JB Weld Clear. It's really for acrylic, but it's the only thing I can find that comes in big bottles like this, so it's my go-to epoxy. You know, I don't need that much, so if you know, this is a repair that I've made for some damage that I made that hopefully you won't have to deal with. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix up this epoxy, and then I'll pour it into here.
Okay, this is kind of crazy. So I've mixed up the epoxy here, and I also masked off some of this area because I know I'm going to spill it. I don't think there's any way I'll be able to pour this into that little hole. So after I've mixed this up, I'm quickly in a panic. I'm going to grab this squeeze bottle and see if I can't put the epoxy in the squeeze bottle to get it in that little hole. This is anything but ideal. The syringe would work a lot better. I'm going to lose a lot of the epoxy sticking to the sides here, so hopefully enough of this will pool up down here. Here goes nothing. With any luck, I can get enough into here that it'll start to come out the other hole, and then I'll know that I've got enough. Okay, I feel like I can see the epoxy coming out the other, or coming up to the other hole. I'm not sure though. I'm afraid the cavity inside this thing may go all the way around this whole area. If that's the case, I just don't have enough epoxy. We'll let this cure and come back in about 5 minutes. and take a look at it.
The epoxy is cured now, so I can go ahead and go on. I think in my case the epoxy worked fine. It didn't fill all the way up, but it came pretty close to it. So I don't have to drill back into the epoxy anyway. And what you didn't see me do, other than take off the tape, is I actually drilled this hole a slightly bit bigger. So I basically went one size larger for this, just so that this wasn't, super tight. It'll actually fit inside there. If you're going with the 4mm bit, that should be fine. But if you're going with the fraction, then go up one size more. Also, on top of having these pieces here, I've also got a couple of washers. These are 3/8 inch washers. These are not the ones that come with the switch, so these are smaller because they have to actually fit onto this space. Whereas the washers that actually come with it, or the nuts, are too big for that. These are smaller and will definitely fit there. In fact, this is the same size washer that I glued to the front here. Once again, that's a 3/8 inch washer. That's about 9.5 millimeters. So, 9 millimeters would probably be fine. If not, then 10 millimeters is still probably going to work fine. And once again, if yours is a little different than this one, it may be slightly larger here, or it might be smaller. So you'll have to measure that and make sure it all works for you. I've also decided that I think hot glue is the way to go here. After you drill in, I would use the hot glue gun because it's kind of got a nozzle already, and just put enough hot glue in there that there's kind of some backing on here. It's not just a big hollow space. You may have to use a whole stick of hot glue to fill in that space, but you just need something that's going to keep this from just falling through there. Anyway, let's get to it. I've got my hot glue gun, and let's see what happens here. I'm just going to go slowly. That seems to be right up to the edge, and I'm going to push this in. That should bring the hot glue up above the level just by displacement. And now I'm going to place this washer over that. And the idea here is that the glue will come up over the, mushroom over the top of the hole, spread out, and then with this on top of everything, that should keep the switch from pushing back into it or coming out of it. So that's the plan anyway. Trying to get the washer as flush as I can. Looks like it's a little bit sticking out at the bottom. There we go. That looks pretty good, actually. Well, my washer is still not glued in place, though. So I'm just going to put a little bit more hot glue on here. I want to be very gentle with the hot glue. Or I should say very sparse with the hot glue. We'll put that back on. Okay. And I'm just going to repeat the process with this one here. That fits in there nicely. Be careful not to squirt hot glue everywhere. Get it in the right place. Put a little bit more glue. And like a drop. Quickly get this in place. All right, and there we have our two switches. I think once we paint that, it's going to look really good. Maybe I need to make sure I've got my little switch and the washer lined up. Okay. Once this is really good and dry or cooled off, I will go ahead and go in and try to clean up all the little strings and stuff, but I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay, so everything cooled off and I was able to come in and clean off all of the hot glue little hairs, the little strings that are everywhere. And it all looks good now. I'm pretty happy with that. So one last thing before we put on the last color of paint, and that is this button right here. So often you see this on even the pieces that were in the movie, and it's so obviously just molded on there. I want to make this look like a button and not just a molded bump on here. So I'm just going to take this, box cutter, razor knife, whatever to call it. I want to be careful with this. I want to try to cut a clean line around the button. Because I want this to look good close up, not just from a distance, or not just on film. And take your time. Try not to put so much force on here that when it finally breaks free, you go, scratching all across the top of it. Okay, and then once you have that, I'm just going to take one of these little files, and I'm just using this corner. What I'm trying to do is I just want to put a little slight gap. I definitely don't want to cut all the way through the plastic because I don't know what's underneath here and this button might fall off. But I want an actual indention into the plastic, just so that it's obvious that this is a separate piece and not just a shape molded into the rest of it. I mean, you don't have to do this. The actual piece of the movie is clearly just a molded bump. I mean, my first thought is to use a Dremel and actually cut in there, but like I said, I don't want this piece to fall out. Plus, the Dremel is going to be hard to control. I think it's going to be really easy to get over, to overcut these corners here. So I think even though this is a bit more drawn out, I think it's going to be safer way to do it. This one's got some little sharper corners on it. It's also got a nice sharp tip. Corners are the hardest part. And there's what I was talking about, where it loaded up and then when it broke loose I ran it all the way across. I think it's still going to be okay, but I would rather not have that line running across there. You can cover that up with some dirt later on. Okay, I think that's going to work. So now when I paint this black, it's going to look like a black button, not just a square colored black on the top. Okay, so now we can go ahead and paint that last little bit on here, and we're pretty much done with the basic paint and damage at that point. Now that we have this little groove cut in, and to be honest, probably should have done that before the paint, but you know, sometimes you forget things and have to go back and do them later. But now that we have this little groove sort of filed out, we can go ahead and start painting. And I'm going to paint this flat black, and there's a little rocker button kind of a thing here in the front. Now on screen this seems to be just red like everything else, but I think I want to make mine black, just so it has some separation. So I'm going to paint this black as well as this. And then we need to go back and do kind of a gray for the front up here and this little tube that sticks out. But the first thing we need to do is take some fine sandpaper. This is sort of a medium sandpaper, 220 grit, and very lightly, and if you're using 400 you can be a bit more aggressive, but I'm going to very lightly just kind of scuff up the areas that we want to sand. Going in circles is kind of a good thing. You don't make little streaks in the paint. And I'm not trying to take off the paint, I just want to abrade it a little bit so that it's got some tooth for the other paint to stick to. And I'm going to do the same thing with this little switch in the front. Now I don't need to file an edge in here because it's actually fairly well defined already. Now if I get a little bit too much black in some of these side areas, it's okay, because I'm probably going to go back at the very end with some glossy black to fill in those little gaps so it looks more like a gap instead of a molded area. Okay, and I'm going to use this Rust-Oleum flat black enamel. I'm using enamel because I'm afraid that if I use my usual water-based paint, it's not going to stick very well, even though I have sanded this pretty well and it's been dry for quite a while. But still, let's go ahead and go with this oil-based enamel. I've actually already mixed this up. I know this looks shiny, but when it dries, it should be matte. Get a little more paint on here. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now for this up here. I think what I'm going to do on here is let me get a pencil real quick. No, I can't find a pencil, so I'm just going to freehand this. Now this is satin white, which is not the same as matte or flat white, but it's what I have. And I think it's going to be close enough. Let me give this a little bit more of a mix. I don't need much. That's, 3 or 4 times more than I need. And I'm just going to take some black and mix it in there with it, just some on my brush. That's still a little bit white. I'm gonna wipe most of this paint off the brush and then get a little bit more black. Just loaded up another brush worth of black, and now we're getting there. That's maybe a tad bit light. Let's get just a little bit more black. I don't think there's a precise color here that I'm going for. I just want it to be a gray, not a dark gray. I want it to be a lighter gray, but I don't want it to be confused with, white. It's dirty. So that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to take a little bit of this on a smaller brush. And I'm just going to brush without touching the black that I just painted. And I can always go back and do another coat if I need to. Now I just want to paint the front of this, not from the bottom all the way to the top, but just sort of a rectangular piece that goes across like that. Looks like it angles down a little bit, so I'm going to see if I can't straighten that up a little bit. Okay. Nothing amazing, just there. Don't mess around with it too much. I'm going to let this dry, and then if I need to, I can put another coat on. So let me close up my paints and put a little piece of plastic wrap over the top of that. And we'll let this dry and take a look at it. So it's been a little over an hour, and this is now dry enough that I can touch it without any trouble. I wouldn't want to grab it because I'd probably get fingerprints into it. It's still going to be soft, but it's dry to the touch. And I just want to try to clean up a couple of spots. So I've got this, which is just the this spray paint sprayed into this little container. And before that dries, I'm going to make a couple of touch-ups. Mostly having to do with this part here. Make sure that I don't have too much paint. The lift don't want to run. I've got a nice flat brush so that I can get some decent square edges. This is actually fine on this end here. Got a rogue little hair there. And I think that's the main thing. I'm going to cover up some of these scratches that I made when I was filing this area here. Okay, and now I'm going to let this dry, and we'll take a closer look at the finished basic paint and damage. Overall, I'm quite pleased with how this looks. There are one or two things that I need to clean up in the next video, like that gray barrel. Oh, and I did outline that gray area with a fine Sharpie off camera. But I think we're off to a good start. In the next video, we'll do all the weathering and put on the final touches and basically bring everything to life. If you liked this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section, and I'll do my best to answer them. You know, it's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So, until next time, thanks.